A question that many of us have had to deal with since the days of COVID-19. Sounds strange to say that, huh? Made some of us very accustomed to something we thought was never going to be possible, but we were forced to. Our bosses had to let us work from home full time. But it also highlighted that working the traditional 9 to 5, 5 days a week, Monday to Friday, may no longer be palatable. Let's delve into that with the Senior Associate at commercial law firm Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr. It's Asma Cachaila joining us this morning. Asma, I appreciate your time this morning on eNCA. So we all knew we were going to get to this point, 4-day working weeks, 9 to 5 working from home. I think one of the bigger questions has been those working from home being asked to work beyond the normal office hours. Why? Because they're not at the office. So how difficult is this for a law firm like you to handle?
Yeah, so I mean, that tends to be the problem with working from home. I think generally people find that, they're not able to switch off in particular. And what eventually happens is that so while it might be nice to work from home and be in the comfort of your own home, you kind of just tend to overwork yourself, and there's never a point where you switch off. And that has sort of become a problem productivity-wise for employers all around. So while some might choose and say that it increases morale, their productivity sort of drops based on the fact that they just never get to switch off. And so, it's kind of a touch and go. Some people find it exciting. Employers then obviously suffer because productivity drops. And it leads us into situations where we're unable to effectively work and allow employees to do just what they want.
It's opened up a can of worms as well, hasn't it now? Not just productivity dropping because people never switch off because their laptops are next to them on the couch or the makeshift office that they've developed for themselves at home right near the coffee machine and their Netflix. But the problem as well is we've been hearing, and I don't think it's widespread, hopefully it's not, Asma, you can tell me, but companies now are not quite respecting what they would have traditionally called office hours, 9 to 5. You clock in, you do your job, you get your lunch hour, you clock out at 5 p.m. Those limitations aren't being stuck to either by the employer's side. They're expecting their staff to just be on call all day. But that can't be right either, can it? Even though you're working from home.
No. Yeah, even if you work, so what generally happens is employees who earn under the threshold. So remember, we have two sort of categories of employees: those who earn under the threshold, whose working hours are governed by the Basic Conditions of Employment Act, and then there's those who earn over the threshold who don't necessarily have governed working hours. But as you said, it's important that those hours are technically respected. They set out in your contract of employment, and for people who earn under the threshold, they aren't allowed technically to work over a certain amount of hours based on their sector, but also based on the Basic Conditions of Employment Act. So technically, you're not allowed to work them over those specific hours without, paying overtime. For those who aren't governed by the BCA or working hours aren't particularly set up, that's a bit of a fuzzy area. It does require an employer to be respectful, however, because in particular, they need to, stick to what is in your contract of employment. So if it specifically stipulates that you're supposed to work from 8 to 5, that is where you need to sort of stick as an employer. It is an agreement between you and your employee. So, you've got to stick by it. But like I said, it's very difficult, especially when everything is so accessible at home. Your computer's right there. You can just log on. Yeah. It's not... it's easy to abuse. Yeah.
It is very easy to abuse. Just before I say goodbye to you, viewers at the bottom of the screen, Asma, I was seeing the question, and it's just one thing I wanted to ask you just in the last little bit of time I have with you. Could a 4-day working week work here in South Africa? I know it's a loaded question, of course, but what I'm getting at from the law perspective of this as well is what does that do to work hours? Because you're not allowed to work more than 8-9 hours during a day. So, I mean, there's all kinds of ramifications. Do you think it could work very quickly?
Well, so I mean, quickly, it's obviously been tried in a lot of these countries. They've been very successful. Remember, the work that they do is on the 100-80-100 model. So 100% of the remuneration for 80% of the working hours, but with 100% productivity. So ultimately, we need to understand whether that is feasible within South African context. It's also determined, it's also per sector. So, your sector has to determine whether that can work. You can't work 4 days if you're working in a factory, for example.
Yeah.
And while, it's attractive to a lot of countries like New Zealand, I think they've found that it was great. A lot of people said the work intensified. Some employers said that while we've allowed you to work 4-day weeks, we've had to cut time. So we've had to hire more people to work on other shifts. And essentially, it might have just, increased costs for an employer. So it's very difficult to say. And also, as I mentioned before, with our legislation and how it regulates time, regulates working hours, the negotiation that needs to happen before any of that legislation changes, it's very complicated. I'm not going to say that it won't work or that it couldn't work. Again, it would be very dependent on the kind of work that you do. But I think it's, something a lot of people have said that it increased productivity in a lot of countries.
That's almost to your point earlier, that working 5 days a week right now from home actually makes you less productive, maybe 4 days a week from home. But the question has got to be legal. And then, we would have to talk about the unions at one point as well. Maybe that's a discussion for another day. Asma, I'm going to say thank you to you for taking time to speak to us this morning.
Thanks, Gareth.
Senior Associate at commercial law firm Cliffe Dekker Hofmeyr, Asma Cachaila joining us this morning. Fascinating discussion, isn't it? It's possible. Just, I don't know if it could really work. I don't know. We've got a couple of moments. Let me say goodbye to you with our viewer question results from this morning. I asked you this, the President announcing numerous measures to address our